What's up guys, Wolf here. Welcome to another Diablo 4 video. In today's video, I'm going to showcase my current best rogue build. This is going to be great for season 1. If you guys are using rogue in the season, I will showcase what hearts I would use as well when we go through the gear. But I am leveling in my season the barbarian, so that will be posted probably after rogue. I'm trying to test all of the classes. It's obviously going to take quite a bit of time. I'm only level 62 and I am killing enemies that are way above my level. I should not be doing this. Nightmare dungeon tier upwards of tier 22, 23. It's ridiculous. I can almost one-shot some of the mobs, and the elites stand no chance against this Twisting Blades Shadow build. I hope you guys do enjoy it. If you do enjoy this build, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and let's get into it. So generally, rogue does feel like a squishy class, but with my build, you feel like a tank. It's actually quite amazing how much damage we can tank with this setup, but also the amount of damage we're doing is really good. That's why I think you guys will enjoy this setup. So how I would play with this build is quite simple, but it is quite tricky, and it does take a bit of time to actually get used to it, because yes, we are doing simple things, but at the end of the day, you have to do them in a certain sequence and pay attention to what's going on. So you're only proccing a few things, but you need to kind of do them in a sense of order to fully make the build work. But it's up to you. I mean, there's many different ways of playing it. Not one is the best way. But for me, I feel like with the way that I've set this build up, the way that I would generally play and I recommend playing is if I'm playing in more difficult content that's a bit tricky, I would use my Poison Imbuement and get that activated and activate my Dark Shroud. Poison Imbuement will be good to, when we proc it on, it puts down poison and it actually does damage over time, and it does a lot of damage over time. So I think this is really important to start getting the ticks off of maybe the difficult mobs that are tanky or the elites. Then what I would do is while I have that procced on the enemies, I would proc Shadow Imbuement, which will create AoE explosions and also gives me increased critical strike chance against injured enemies, which is decent, and it makes enemies vulnerable if they blow up. And just kind of like rinse and repeat between those two imbuements. You can use the Cold Imbuement, which is good, but I recommend going for these two, as I found it to be a lot better in more difficult content. So you blow the enemies up with the Shadow Imbuement and make them vulnerable, and then have the poison ticking over time. You can do it in different sequences, or you don't have to do it in that order, but I guess it just depends on you and how you're going to be playing. Because when you actually enter into the fight with that Dark Shroud that I was mentioning earlier, it's the little shadows hovering around you. We get movement speed. That's what I've chosen on my modifier, and these shadows actually give us damage reduction. So we have 5 shadows, gain 9.2% damage reduction per active shadow. And each time we take direct damage, that damage is reduced and the shadow is consumed. Dark Shroud is very important, and I've got some great aspects that synergize with Dark Shroud. So this is a very good skill, and I recommend you use it, especially considering how squishy rogue can be. Then the dash is going to be good for getting out of difficult situations, but also getting a bit of a head start towards an engagement. Once you've procced all those previous things, Dark Shroud, imbuements, you can dash into enemies. Now, I also have another aspect that makes this really good, and we get our cooldown on our dash reduced heavily. And I've also got a modifier from the skill tree that pushes this even further. So enemies will take 15% increased critical strike damage for 5 seconds when we dash into them, when we actually damage them from the dash. It's also considered a cutthroat imbuable skill, which is important because think about how many affixes, for example, that buff imbuement and cutthroat skills. So this is going to be really good, and the damage will actually surprise you. There's a high lucky hit chance on this as well. So I think as long as you're constantly spamming Dark Shroud, the dash, the imbuements, then you'll have no problem. So the way that Twisting Blades work, and I recommend using it, Flurry is probably going to be a bit easier to use early on, but Twisting Blades is so incredibly good. The reason being is that when you impale an enemy, you deal damage, and you also make them take increased damage from you while they are impaled, which goes towards everything else. So after about 1.5 seconds, the blades return to you, piercing enemies for a huge amount of damage. So we get our cooldowns reduced when they pass through enemies, and it also deals 30% increased multiplicative damage when returning to us. So it's AoE damage. So when you stab an enemy with it, you pierce them, You run around and they follow you, and if you run through a mob, it goes through the entire mob and sometimes one-shots them. And this is a lot of damage. And you know, it's up to you if you spam it more often. It depends on your resource, your primary resource, you know, how much energy do you actually have. But you know, there's ways of generating energy. But for me, what I do is I use my basic skill, Puncture, use it every now and again to proc vulnerable, then use one twisting blade, then maybe a few more, and then move to the next section of the mob so that the damage from the initial twisting blade can carry through. You'll see from the way I play in the game, but you don't have to do that. Sometimes you can just stand still and spam twisting blades, and then when you don't have energy, just proc your Puncture, and then that works as well. And it just really does do a lot of damage over time, not just over time, but instantaneously. And the AoE from the explosion and the actual movement of the twisting blades makes us very, very strong. So that's kind of the gameplay and the way that I play with this setup. So I will be updating the Paragon boards for all my builds very soon. If you guys want to check them, I post them exclusively on Mobalytics, so the link will be down below if you want to see all of my latest builds I've posted there. So let's take a look at the skill tree. So the skill tree is going to be quite simple. The specialization I've gone for is inner sight. Now, it really does depend on you what you go for here. There's not like one thing that's the best. Now, I will be making other kinds of setups. Don't you worry, guys. I will make plenty of rogue builds when I get the time. I have been busy at work, but I'll try my best to put out the videos as soon as I can. So this skill tree will be on the Mobalytics page on my profile. So go and check that out if you guys want a detailed explanation. I will quickly just summarize why I've chosen the things I've chosen here. So this is just what you're going to be spamming. You can choose the primary one if you want. This is up to you. But I think it's important, and Puncture is actually quite good. You can do a significant amount of damage with it. There are other options, but I prefer that. Twisting Blades, try to get it as high as you can. I've got 7 out of 5, and I've gone for Advanced Twisting Blades for the cooldowns, which is really, really good. So enemies are dazed while impaled with Twisting Blades. I can daze enemies from my dash because of an aspect, and that also decreases the cooldown of my dash. So this is going to be really good. Sturdy, we have got close damage reduction. This is one of the most important, guys. Mitigating damage is very important on your rogue. Then siphoning strikes, also a must-have. You need to go for this. Then moving on to the agility skills, as you guys know, dash, and I've gone for methodical dash, very good. And weapon mastery isn't super important. There are other options that you can get, but I do actually recommend this for now. Maybe later on when we start doing higher tier nightmare dungeons, you go for more like rugged or reactive defense, things like that. Then Dark Shroud. I cannot tell you guys how amazing this is. Once I put it on, it's not just the movement speed, but survivability makes it really, really powerful. So I recommend you go for this and try and go for Subverting Dark Shroud for movement speed. But if you need more strike chance, this is also very good. Then the imbuements. Like I said, cold imbuement is good, but I don't recommend it, especially if you need to do high damage when you're trying to level up. Once you get like a min-max build, then this could definitely be better than poison, but for now it does a lot more damage poison, so I recommend going for this. I've gone for blended poison imbuement and then blended shadow imbuement. Very nice. I highly recommend doing these, and then make sure you guys do 3 out of 3 for consuming shadows. Each time you kill an enemy with shadow damage, you generate 30 energy. This is what will give you your primary resource back, because there'll be lots of explosions from the shadow. It's going to be really good, and this is how we generate so much energy. So just go 1 for shadow crashed. You can go for more if you want, but that's up to you. So for these adrenaline rush, I have got this. It speaks for itself. 2 out of 3, and then 3 out of 3 for haste. Then finally for the key passive, close quarters combat. There are many different options, but I prefer this. So make sure to click the link down below and go check this out. The skill tree, Paragon board, and gear is all there for you guys to have a look at. Let's take a look at the Paragon board. You guys can click the link in the description and you can go through it in your own time. I'm just going to quickly kind of summarize what we are looking at. So the first glyph I've chosen is Chip. I think because physical damage is a primary part of the setup, this is going to be really, really good. We deal increased physical damage. And also it's just a general increase of damage I take from you. So with these boards, you kind of just want to spec into what's available. So if there's lots of intelligence nodes around, you want to do something that requires intelligence, try and make them green, try fill them out. It is quite important. So this one requires dexterity. So what I would do is I would edit this and I would place the dexterity in here. I think that's quite important. So as you guys can see, it indicates to me here that I need to put it in. So the more dexterity, the better. And this one gives us a lot. So for every 5 dexterity purchased within range, we do increased physical damage, which is great. And obviously the additional bonus is activated. So the first board I'm going to go for is Tricks of the Trade, and the glyph I've chosen is this one right here. So we get a bonus to all rare nodes, and there are some really good rare nodes here. So I recommend going for that. And also we take 10% reduced physical damage from vulnerable enemies. They're mostly going to be vulnerable. This is really good. There's lots of strength nodes here. It helps us survive. So the synergy is great for that, but you can use whatever you want. Make sure the legendary node is activated. We move here, we touch into these rare nodes, which is quite important. Then we go into this board right here, which is going to be exploit weakness. This is just good. We are going off of the vulnerability once again, because with rogue, enemies are going to be vulnerable all the time. Lots of survivability, vulnerable damage here. It's really nice. Then the glyph I've gone for is Closer. While wielding a melee weapon, you take 10% reduced damage. You can put whatever you want here, it doesn't matter. For every 5 dexterity purchase within range, the cutthroat skills deal increased damage, which is very nice because there's plenty of dexterity, lots of extra damage. Then I've kind of branched here, and then I will update the build later on once I get further leveled. Then the Malignant Hearts, if you guys are leveling up in Season 1, I would go for this one right here to apply all imbuement effects. And you could basically change some of your skills and get a lot of utility from this, because yes, I said the Poison and Shadow for this build is better, but they all are really good. So this could be really strong. Let me know in the comments down below if you've tried it and how good these are, or if you've got any kind of suggestions for me. Then I would go for the Barber. I think this will work really well with Rogue. Then Determination. So just to help us with our primary resource so that we can spam more of the Twisting Blades. Let's take a look at the gear pieces. So one thing that I can recommend to change on the way I've set this up is defensive aspects are probably more important than offensive. But it is kind of like a balance. It depends on how far you're trying to push yourself and how quickly you want to level up. So for me, trying to get my life higher is going to be very important. That's why I have gone for these gems. Rubies are great for getting some more maximum life. Another thing I want to talk about is, like, for example, my amulet here. I would recommend putting a defensive aspect here if you guys are struggling. If you kind of think you need to survive a bit more and you're dying quicker, especially because resistances in this game is quite difficult and pretty much broken, you could put something like this one right here, the Protector, or you can put the one that gives you armor when you deal any form of damage. You put it here, it gives you increased efficiency of that aspect. So definitely go for that if you guys need to. Also, something I want to mention for survivability, something that really makes a big difference is damage reduction. Try and get lots of rolls of damage reduction on your pants, your chest piece, for example. That's going to be very important. But one thing that I wanted to talk about, which I found to be almost a game changer, is actually life on kill. Life on kill has saved me so many times because of the explosion of the shadow imbuement. We get so many enemies to die at one time, then we get so much life. It's very important, guys. Try and get life on kill as an affix. And I think those are the main survivability aspects that or tricks that I can tell you with Rogue, because Rogue can be quite squishy. Yes, you're doing lots of damage, but you can be squishy. And I know, there are aspects, for example, we've got this aspect right here that in addition to this will actually help you survive more, because we're going to be proccing a base skill a lot with the Puncture. Skills grant 20% damage reduction for 2 seconds. So this is your basic skill, so Puncture. So this one that doesn't cost any primary resource. So all of these aspects will help. Some of those affixes I mentioned, and placing a defensive aspect here, that will help you survive. I just wanted to mention that straight away so you guys know. As you can see, I haven't leveled up everything to the max. I need to play a bit more. I haven't had too much time, but I think the aspects I've chosen work so incredibly well. Survivability. Damaging an elite grants a barrier. This is going to be very nice. The extra armor from the chest. If you guys want to check all of this, it'll be on my Mobalytics profile. Link down below. Also, we will have a lot of max resource because of the passive I showed you, which is really good, in a site as well, which is great. So if you guys look here, Attack marked enemies to fill up your inner sight gauge. When it's full, gain unlimited energy for 4 seconds. So I think this specialization point is really nice. And it works perfectly with this, so we get increased damage based on our primary resource. So that's when we can fully spam. It does proc quite often. That's why I've gone for that. So on the boots, this is a definite underrated aspect. You automatically drop a smoke grenade at the end of dash. Dash's cooldown is reduced by up to 0.35 seconds for each enemy dazed. This way, up to 1.05 seconds. This is great. It is a lot of utility here. I recommend you guys do it. That means we can dash more often, and it's just a lot of utility when we actually daze the enemies and they stand still. We can continuously spam our skills. It's really, really good. Then make sure you put the twisting blades aspect on this weapon and try and use what I've got here, the crossbow, because we get vulnerable damage. Very, very good. Try find a high DPS one as well. Twisting blades orbit. This is a great aspect. Make sure you guys put it on your weapon to get extra damage. This is very, very good. And then for the jewelry, I've got critical strikes with core skills, which is twisting blades, increase your attack speed. Attack speed is very, very strong. The more we can spam, the quicker we can spam, the more damage we do. High forms of DPS. But if you want to put a defensive aspect here, it'll be a bit stronger. Then we get killing a vulnerable enemy gives us energy regeneration. Very important. I really want to get this higher because this allows you to spam more twisting blades. Then over here, we've got restore 1 of your primary resource when you crowd control an enemy. Also very good. So with these weapons, I've chosen swords. You can go for daggers. This gives you damage to enemies from close, so close damage. Problem is, you're going to be running around away from enemies and your twisting blades are going to be hitting them. So sometimes it won't count. That's why I probably recommend going for critical strike damage. It depends if you're going to be standing close to enemies. Do you guys see what I'm saying? So that depends on you. But for now, my best ones are these, which are swords, which gives me critical strike damage, which is all right, as long as your crit chance isn't too low. Then imbuement skill effects have up to a 40% increased potency. This makes them really, really good. And the poison melts the enemies, which is great. This is also a very underrated, very powerful aspect. When Dark Shroud Shadow, because we're going to be getting lots of those, would be removed, you trigger an explosion around yourself that deals up to 1,000 shadow damage. This is a lot of damage where it scales off of the multipliers. It's a lot more than you think. This can also one-shot. And this is how I'm doing so much damage, or AoE damage up close, because it's not only mitigating damage at Dark Shroud, but it's giving out damage and also making me run faster. Such a good aspect. Give it a try. The affixes I would go for, I think primarily is going to be physical damage, because as you guys can see, twisting blades is physical damage, and the puncture basic skill. So physical damage, shadow damage, anything like that, imbued skill damage, anything like that will help you do a lot of extra damage. Cutthroat skills, which are these. So as you guys can see, just below where it says item contribution, it says core cutthroat. It tells you what it is. So any kind of increase in cutthroat is going to be really, really good. So I recommend going for that. Dash is also a cutthroat, like I mentioned earlier. So that will definitely increase your damage. And then crit chance, crit damage, that's going to be really important. Vulnerable damage, damage to poisoned, anything like that will help. There are quite a few ways to do it, like going for intelligence, which will increase your skill damage. So there are many ways. I think speccing into like a critical strike damage is probably better than damage to close enemies, because like I said, when you're running with twisting blades, you probably find it won't count as damage to close enemies. It's tricky and it depends on you, but that's, any kind of buff to what we're using is going to help. Then for defensive ones, we can go for anything like damage reduction, total armor, health on kill, extra health, strength. That's all important, and I think is going to help you a lot. Dodge chance is also good. Then for our primary resource, we want to try and get that back. We would go for extra energy. Anything like that will help us. So it's really up to you. It depends on RNG. But when you're going for these, I would definitely recommend what I've mentioned. But it really does just depend on your playstyle. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.